Today, we're going to introduce the Bill of Rights, talk a little bit about the First Amendment, and talk about freedom of speech. So, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution are called the Bill of Rights. If we think back when they signed the original Constitution, there were no amendments, there was no Bill of Rights, and this was one of the arguments they had. Anti Federalists, some of them didn't sign it because it didn't have a Bill of Rights. They basically agreed that at some point in the near future, a Bill of Rights would be added, and they did, and it took about 2 or 3 years. So we get our first 10 amendments, let's say by 1790. Since then, we have more than 10 amendments. We have 27 total today. So between 1790 and today, another 17 have been added. The First Amendment lists 5 different freedoms that we have, and these are in the order that they appear. We have freedom of speech, and speech includes our words and symbolic speech, which we'll talk about. We have freedom of religion. We have freedom of the press. That might be a new term. The press is the media, meaning we have the right to report the news. Anytime I use the word we, I'm talking about citizens, the people. We look at these and we might think, well, of course we have these things. These things are obvious. But what we have to remember is not all countries have these. So I think we take them for granted, but not everyone has these. Another one, assembly, which is the right to gather in groups. The reason they put this in there was because when they were colonies, when the British still controlled the colonies, there was a point when King George took away the right to gather in groups. It was after the Boston Tea Party. And King George was upset that the colonists dressed up like natives and dumped all the tea into the harbor. So one of his responses to this was he took away their right to gather in groups so they couldn't plan future things. So that's why that one was mentioned. And finally, in the First Amendment, we have the right to petition. And petition is a written request to an authority. It could be a government, a president. It could be to the principal asking for changes. And you get a bunch of people to sign it to show that a lot of people agree with what you're saying. So these are the first 5. Let's start focusing in on freedom of speech. Freedom of speech essentially allows us to say anything we want without getting in trouble by the government. So we can say what we want, and there's not a chance we'll get arrested, except there's always exceptions. There are 2 exceptions to freedom of speech. Number 1, you cannot threaten anyone. And it doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter if it's the president. It doesn't matter if it's your neighbor. It doesn't matter if it's a random guy walking down the street. You cannot threaten someone, and you can be arrested for that. The second one is your words cannot create a dangerous situation. I'll give you an example. This is kind of the classic example. So let's say I walk into a crowded movie theater, and the theater is packed, and I go in there and I yell the word fire. And when I yell that word, what people are going to do is they're going to jump out of their chairs. They're going to run out to the exit because they think the theater is on fire. And while they're running out, it's reasonable to assume that someone could get injured. Okay? So that one word I yelled, fire, has now created a dangerous situation. I would be arrested for that. I'm not protected by the First Amendment when it comes to that. Freedom of speech, moving on, isn't just our words. Can we express ourselves without using our words? And the answer is yes. And this is called symbolic speech. And symbolic speech is a form of speech that expresses an idea without words. So some examples, let's say I wanted to say that I like football. I'm making this up. So I can use my words and I can tell you I like football, or I can use symbolic speech and I could make a sign that says I like football, or I could use my hands to like imitate what a football is and then give it like a thumbs up. So I'll give you some more classical examples. So this first one, this is one of the more obvious ones. These people are out most likely protesting on the streets and they're holding up signs. So even if they never say a word, this sign right here is expressing an idea. This, you may remember this 2 or 3 years ago, a lot of athletes, they were protesting various things going on in America. So during the Star Spangled Banner before the games, instead of standing up, they knelt or they went down to one knee. Again, didn't say anything, but they were expressing an idea. Symbolic speech can be words on a clothing, or in this case, words on a mask. This guy, I got to give you some context on. This was in the 1960s or early 70s. The United States was fighting in Vietnam, and it wasn't, a lot of people didn't think we should be fighting. Anyway, during this war, also, the government started a draft. A draft is when younger men are forced to fight in the military. And all, I think it was 18 to 22-year-olds were issued a draft card. And it was like kind of like an ID card, but it was their draft card with their name and stuff on it. And they were supposed to carry it around with them. This guy, you can see in the photo, he is burning his draft card, which was illegal. Again, he's not saying anything, but he is actually protesting the Vietnam War by burning that card. And here's the last one, symbolic speech, the burning of a flag.